The objective today is to explain the impacts DMCA has on the internet in general. So what you're doing is telling me what it is, why it matters, who are the people affected, and then some tips moving forward for your own website creation so we don't find ourselves in any trouble. Alright, so in 1998, the internet was a newborn baby from a commercial perspective, and Congress sought to build a certain protective foundation to let the medium grow. The DMCA was such an act and protected Internet Service Providers, also known as ISPs, may have heard that term before, from copyright infringement claims based on content transferred by third parties through the provider's systems. So we go over this idea a lot in computer science, but in web design class we haven't talked too much about the internet and how it's a system built on other systems. But in general here, what DMCA is doing is taking away some of the responsibility from these ISPs. Just because Verizon may offer you internet service doesn't mean they're the ones who are to blame if you go and violate copyright. So, think, write, share. Who do you think should be responsible for copyright infringement on the internet? Over on the right hand side here, I have who is hosting this ? This is a website you can go to in order to file a complaint, basically, of copyright infringement. So if you find somebody who's stealing basically from you, or you feel they are, you can make that claim there on that website, okay? So DMCA stands for Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is a United States copyright law, and though it's also based on 2 World Intellectual Property Organization treaties, this DMCA is, a United States thing. It criminalizes production and dissemination of technology, devices, or services intended to circumvent measures that control access to copyrighted works. So it's a little bit more of just somebody downloaded my copy of music that's a copyrighted thing. It's much bigger than that. It says here commonly known as digital rights management, or DRM. So if you've tried to burn a CD maybe, or you've tried to do a file transfer to copy something, maybe a bootleg movie or something, if there's DRM protection on it, you can't. It's you can, but I'm not going to teach you how. It's much more complicated than just doing a file transfer or a copy. And I guess if we're talking about a bootleg, it's already, just its existence is already a violation of copyright. Think, write, share. What does the DMCA do exactly? It also criminalizes the act of circumventing an access control, whether or not there is actual infringement of copyright itself. So if you break DRM, you could still be in trouble even if you actually didn't take anything after breaking it. Okay. In addition, the DMC heightens the penalties for copyright infringement on the internet. So on one hand, it takes some responsibility off of the ISPs, and on the other hand, it increases the responsibility on individuals. Think, write, share. What would be a fair punishment for circumventing copyright? So how long does this last? Generally speaking, the life of the author plus 70 years. So if Beyonce makes a song, that song is copyrighted, and you cannot take it without paying her entire life plus 70 years after she passes away. And for those 70 years, for most cases, the proceeds of that money would be going to her children. So for institutional works, we're talking 95 years from the publication or 12 years from creation, whichever is shorter. So if I create something on behalf of my school here, it is copyrightable for 95 years from the moment I release it onto the internet, or it could just be 12 years from the date that I am creating this, which I am not going to tell you. So what are your rights when you create something? Because I want you to always think about this. Yeah, there are some punishments for people who are breaking copyright, and you might not think it's too big a deal, especially at your age. I would not be surprised if the vast majority of you did not care about copyright, and if you want to watch a movie, a television show, or listen to a song, you might not think it's all that bad of a thing, but a lot of people would definitely disagree with you. So think about, if you were in their shoes, would you want your work that you had done to be just taken? And maybe your answer is yes, you don't mind at all. That's definitely a culture change I think our society is going through. I wouldn't be surprised, but nonetheless, here are your rights. You have the right to reproduce work in copies and phonorecords. That just means music files or CDs. So you have the right to reproduce work in copies, to prepare derivative works. So if you are creating something like I'm creating this video for the purpose of education, no monetary gain whatsoever. So I'm using a picture. I have no idea who owns the copyright on this picture, but this is a derivative work, so I should be okay to reproduce this. I also have the right to distribute copies or phonorecords to the public by sale or lease, etc., if they are, appropriately created. The right to publicly perform and display work generally does not apply to sound recordings, so that too exists. It's hard to hold somebody accountable if they have taken another work and they're publicly performing, or they just showed the display maybe randomly, just held up the picture in the street, and then, that was it. And then the last one is moral rights for visual art. And that's a bit more complicated. Rights of attribution and integrity. Okay, I'll let you do individual research to learn more about that one. So for your Think, Write, Share, what are the 4 basic rights associated with copyright? So in summary here, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998 limits the liability of online service providers. That's the big one. Here's a story of a communication company being sued for $25 million right after this act was passed. And the person who was being violated had won the case because that ISP, that online service provider, they were unable to comply with some regulations DMCA lays out. Mainly that you will kick off people who are repeat offenders. So if you in America are caught constantly violating copyright law, you are not supposed to have access to the internet anymore, nor will you be allowed on many websites, especially the sites that you are publishing that copyright violation on. And then you may ask, how are people catching each other in violations of copyright? If I just said that ISPs are not completely responsible anymore, as long as they're being diligent about kicking off repeat offenders, well, what about something like YouTube, where if you create an account, maybe you could create 50 different accounts from 50 different computers around town, the school, the library, maybe your own home, using your cell phone, and then you're just constantly publishing the violations of copyright. Well, YouTube, aka Google, has webmasters, people they hire, whose job it is to follow up on allegations. So the website I told you about at the very beginning, who is hosting this ? You can go to that website, fill out a form to post a notice that you feel like there's a violation occurring, and the webmaster will get that notice, and they are responsible for taking it down, whatever that violation is. Webmasters get paid pretty good, $72,000 a year. I looked up this is their average salary. And also, here's some qualifications for such a job. You must have working knowledge of HTML, JavaScript, and SQL, also known as SQL. So, that's a job you're interested in the future. That salary doesn't look so bad. So 2 tips moving forward here as you're creating your own websites. You don't have to register a copyright on your content for it to be protected. You can, and it may make it easier to prove it's yours if a violation becomes a nasty fight, but it's not mandatory. Also, make sure you understand how fair use works and that your content does not fall under those standards before you take any action. So, to summarize, a lot of people blame a lot of others for a lot of things, okay? And there's a process, a legal process you would go through if somebody was to take work that you feel is unjustly taken, okay? Going back to the idea of how much of an idea can you take before it's too much. Well, if you feel like somebody's ripping you off there, you have DCMA to help protect you, okay? So here's the IB questions, 7 of them. Go ahead and choose one to answer. Here's the DOL for the end of the day. The problem with the DMCA is that things are often taken down or blocked anyway because companies don't have time to look into things in depth and are afraid of lawsuits. So what that's saying is webmasters might just not even hesitate to delete content if there's even the slightest accusation of copyright violation. So with that in mind, answer these 2 questions. What are some of the unintended consequences of DMCA? And why should people support the DMCA?